What is going on, my fellow nerds? OperatorOtter, and what we're going to do today is we're going to actually discuss the tier list of the builds for Necromancer going into Season 2. Now, disclaimer, as we move forward, all of this is theory, right? We don't know for sure where everything is going to land because we just haven't been able to have it in our hands and play with not only the new class balance changes, but also the vampiric powers going into Season 2. We just don't know, right? They're also changing how dungeons are being laid out. So this, remember, just because you do more damage doesn't mean you deal more damage. You have to think about how that damage is applied and how that's going to move through a dungeon. Now, this list is going to be primarily focused on speed clears and T100 clears. And once we get to the A to S plus tier, that's where things are going to shift around a little bit depending on whether or not you're doing a regular speed clear or you're doing a T100 clear. And make no mistake, T100s are going to be very important to do because of the item power changes that they're making that's associated with the monster level. Now, the gentleman and I that did this was Sir K and I, and if you've ever come into my stream and you've met Sir K, he's an extremely intelligent theory crafter, and with every single build, we went into depth. I mean, we spent about probably 5 to 6 hours discussing all of the builds and where they should land and what we think is gonna be the place where all the builds land within this tier system. We also looked at all of the different interactions, all of the different uniques, everything that's going on. So, you know, like I said, we don't know exactly where everything is going to land, but do note that he and I that theorized what builds were going to be the best for Necromancer in preseason and Season 1, we were correct. We were correct in what the builds were going to be best, being Bone Spear and then the Omni Storm Bone Spear was going to be the best builds in the game. And so, you know, a lot of people were kind of disagreeing with that, but we were right. So I'm not saying that I'm putting myself up on a pedestal. I'm just saying there's a track record, and therefore we're pretty confident in our abilities to kind of give you the best information that we can. But at the same time, just because we've been right before doesn't mean that we're going to be right now. So take this with a grain of salt and, you know, play the game as you would play the game. Okay. All right. So let's start from the bottom tier, which is needs Jesus. As in literally needs to find a new religion to get help. Like, you on the streets and you addicted to that good stuff, and you need something to get back on track. And for this build, unfortunately, it's going to be the Bone Spirit. So Bone Spirit basically did everything that Bone Spear did in terms of its core mechanics at how it functioned. It just did it worse. The problem is that Bone Spirit is just a one attack, boom, look at me, it's like a bottle rocket. And it was fun because it kind of mimicked the Bazooka Wizard from Diablo 3, and that was my favorite build of all time from any of Diablo 3. I loved Bazooka Wizard. Super, super fun, interesting gameplay loop, and the mechanics and how that all came out to play. Super, super fun. But Bone Spirit kind of worked in the same way, except that now that Crit and Vuln have been nerfed into the dirt, as well as Ossified has been nerfed into the dirt, and you have a smaller essence pool, yeah, this is rough. So, you know, press F to pay respects. I'm not going to go into too much detail of this one, but Bone Spirit has been eliminated. It's gone. It just is what it is. Sorry if you're a Bone Spirit player. All right, going into C tier. Bone Spear. So many other people put Bone Spear into B tier. I've seen some of the other YouTube content creators. We're going to put it in the C tier. The crit nerfs, when we calculated the damage with the Ossified nerfs and the Essence nerfs, Bone Spear is legitimately going to be doing between 77 and 82% less damage than it was doing in Season 1. And we no longer have Barber. So, yeah, it's not looking hot. It's not looking hot. You know, Bone Spear has had its place as the best build pretty much in the game that didn't utilize a bug, and it's time to come down a tier. So I'm kind of glad that they've shoved it down almost near the bottom of the list so that other Necromancer builds can come out and play, and I'm very happy about that. But it is time to let Bone Spear go, and it is time to move into something new and do something more fresh. So rip the Bone Spear, but that's just kind of what's happening. All right, next on the list, we have Army of the Dead Minions. So Army of the Dead Minions basically does everything that the Mendel minion build does, but worse. That's all it is. It's just, we wanted to originally put it into C tier, but we're actually going to give the benefit of the doubt and put it into B tier just simply because there's so many changes that are coming to minions that there's probably a way that someone's going to make it work. Someone's going to cook up the good recipe, and it's probably going to be good B tier. So once we get to B tier, this is where you're basically going to be able to do T70s solo and be able to do them quite well at T70 and move through the game, and you'll still be able to do all the content relatively well. But, you know, moving any higher than that, you're going to have some difficulty. Not to say that it's impossible, but you're probably going to have a hard time. And minions are just, you know, the core issue with minions is that you cannot control what they attack. And until we get an ability to control what minions attack and where minions can move, like we can literally move the minion to this spot for like suppressors, or we can tell them to completely legit attack a specific target like command skeletons in Diablo 3. Minions are just always going to be kind of meh, right? Because you're just kind of hoping that RNG allows the minions to attack the things that are threats or the things that need to die. So that's just kind of the way it is. But yeah, it's better than it was, so that's a good thing. All right, moving on. This is where things are going to get really dicey, and we're going to start getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty of the mechanics of what's going on and where things can kind of shift around a little bit. So the first one being the Bloodlance Overpower build. So they're making a bunch of Overpower changes, and make no mistake, Overpower is going to be very, 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 very strong. But the problem with Bloodlance isn't the damage that it deals more than the way that it deals that application, and the fact that because of the new uniques and the new powers that are coming in to modify how Overpower is working, Bloodlance now just doesn't have the space in the build to utilize Lidless Wall. And because it can't do that, and it has to utilize something else, that means it can no longer really abuse Bone Storm at 100% efficiency. Now, it is going to be able to reduce the cooldown of Bloodstorm pretty fast and be able to bring it down to probably around like a 20-second cooldown, but you kind of need Bone Storm to be up all the time, and the reason being is because it increases your crit hit chance. Now, Otter, what are you talking about? It's an Overpower build. Overpowers can't crit. Yes, you are correct. Overpowers can't crit. But here's the thing. Anything that was a multiplier to crit also affect Overpower. And here's the reason why. The way that the game codes the global multipliers is going to be at the very end of the damage calculations, being that it's going to take your damage buckets and then it adds the Overpower. That's how it used to work. It's not working that way anymore, and there's a video that talks about how it works, but everything's conglomerated now. But the point is that all your damage is going to get conglomerated in terms of your damage buckets that are current to your character, and after all of that is calculated, then the multipliers, being the global multipliers for your skills and your aspects, are then going to be used at the very end of the equation. Now, one of the things that does multiply Overpower damage is crit multipliers, because if the Overpower crits, which it's not that the Overpower crits, it's that you overpowered and you crit at the same time, which is not how it's working now, but that's how it worked before. But now, even then, before and now, it still kind of works in the same way. If you overpower and your damage is a crit, then what happens is that the multiplier for Essence and for Grasping Veins does not affect only the crit damage. It takes the total damage that you dealt and multiplies that if the damage dealt was a crit. And that's just how it's coded. So when we have, this is why for Overpower builds, you're still going to be stacking crit hit chance, and you're going to be stacking your crit hit multipliers. You do not want to stack crit hit damage, because that's not going to affect your damage. But the crit hit multipliers might as well say Overpower multipliers, because that's kind of how it's working. It's a weird, we don't know if it's a bug or if that's just the way they want it to be designed, but that is the way that's happening. Overpower is scaling with crit multipliers. And so that's really, really powerful. The problem with Bloodlance is that it can't utilize the Bone Storm. And then on top of that, it just takes too long to turn online. Make no mistake, Bloodlance is going to deal the most damage in the game for Necromancers. It will definitely be the highest DPS build for Necromancers. The problem is that it takes too long to come online. And that's a problem when we're trying to speed clear, right? Because it's like, think of it like the Bazooka Wizard from Diablo 3, where I was only able to cast 1 meteor every 20 seconds. Now, that 1 meteor that dropped dealt 150 quadrillion damage, but I could only do that once every 20 seconds. And then the rest of the 20 seconds, I was just kind of preparing for the next meteor to drop and stacking all of these buffs. Well, if I'm doing a T16 clear or a lower Grift clear, I don't want to use a Bazooka Wizard, because I'm able to kill things fast enough that by the time I get to the boss, even if the Bazooka Wizard could kill the boss in one hit, I've gotten to the boss so much faster that just because it takes me longer to kill the boss, I still have done the dungeon faster. And so that's a really big thing to think about in terms of thinking about damage application. So with Bloodlance, that's the big things that we're seeing for it. It's taking too long for the damage to turn online. And when the damage does turn online, it's not dealing it to the entire screen. It's dealing it to a relatively convoluted area. And then it also cannot benefit from getting the extra crit hit chance from the Bone Storm, meaning that it's going to dip into that crit multiplier less efficiently than other builds. So this is why we've put Bloodlance where it is. All right, moving on. We have the Sever Shadow build. So the changes that they're making to Sever and Shadow, Sever's not really changing. It's still the same thing. It's still operating basically the exact same way. They're just making it so that now your glyphs that were scaling off of willpower are now going to scale off of intelligence. And they're also buffing a lot of things that have to do with darkness skill multipliers. So Sever just legitimately is going to do more damage than it did before, which is fantastic. It's still extremely tanky. It still does fantastic damage. I think it will definitely be a good contender for T100s just because of the tankiness of the build. But it's a strong build. It's a good one. So if you're thinking about playing a darkness build and you want to play Sever, know that it's A tier. Now, A tier means that you could probably do about tier 90, like tier 80, tier 90 solo. And you can run through it pretty well. Now, Sever was able to do T100s, but it wasn't necessarily like speed clearing it. And it was able to kill Lilith, but it wasn't like a speed clear. And remember, the best way that we can get gear in Diablo 4 is by speed clearing, right? The faster we go through content, the more rewarded we get for it. That's just the way that the ARPG is designed. So really what we're trying to look for is what build can clear a T100 the fastest. That's really kind of like basically what we're working towards in this tier list. All right, so that's Sever Shadow. All right, next, Mel Minion. Yep, there you go, right? It's Army of the Dead, but it's better. Now, the problem is that they did make a change to the bug fix where the ghostly prison for Bone Prison, when it made enemies vulnerable within that place, it actually got your lucky hit chance up to a 100%, which allowed Mendeln, which was a lucky hit effect, 10%, to proc way more often. And that's basically what made Mendeln extremely powerful. You don't have that anymore, which means that you're going to have a lot less procs than you did in Season 1. But you are also getting a bunch of minion buffs, and you are also getting item power now. And so because of those minion buffs and the changes to item power and what's going on with that, it's probably still going to be an A tier build. The problem, like I said, with minions is that you cannot control what the minions attack. You're just kind of at the mercy of hoping that they attack the right target when you want them to, and kind of playing around the auto minion build of them attacking whatever they want to. And that kind of feels bad, but it's also pretty fun because you're controlling an Army of the Dead, which is basically the Necromancer fantasy. So that's why we put it into A tier. All right, so this is where we're going. We only have one build for S tier, and we have one build for S plus tier. This is where there's probably going to be a lot of controversy as to where we put these two builds. That's okay. But this is where we put the builds. So hear me out before you freak out. In S tier is Infamous. Infamous is looking to be the strongest build in the game for Necromancers, just off of a glance. When you look at the changes that they're making to the crit and vuln, and the fact that dots double stack with skills and double stack with the affixes, how dots function, all the changes that they're making with dots, the fact they're changing all the darkness skill abilities, like, it's legitimately just going to do so much damage. And to make another thing worse is that it's basically invulnerable 80% of the time. You're always in Blood Mist, so you can't really die, and you just kind of kill a bunch of things. Here's the thing with Infamous, is that you're not permanently always in Blood Mist. You do have moments where you're out of Blood Mist, and in those moments that you are out of Blood Mist, you are vulnerable, so you do have a chance of dying. So while you're doing T100s, if you Blood Mist and you come out of it and you don't have your Blood Mist off cooldown, there is a chance where something could hit you and you could die. But the damage that's being applied is going to be crazy. Now, the problem with Infamous that people don't necessarily think about is, once again, another form is damage application. So in order for Infamous to really come online and let those dots do a lot of damage, you have to have your Shadow Blight key stacked, which is 10 instances of damage. Now, you would think that with the Infamous, you would be able to apply those super fast, but it's not as fast as you think, because Blood Mist isn't a darkness ability. And Shadow Blight requires that you need a darkness skill to deal damage, being your corpse explosions. So when your corpses explode and they're dealing their dot damage with those blighted lands, those will deal the dot damage, but it only ticks, I think it's 6 times in a second, 5 or 6 times in a second. So that means that it's going to take about 2 seconds for Shadow Blight to come online, and then it's going to deal damage. So it kind of falls into the same trap as Bloodlands. As well, you can't control necessarily where the damage is going other than using your Infamous to spawn corpses where you want or to utilize that. So if that's the issue, is that you can't necessarily control a lot of times where the damage is being applied. Even though the damage does eventually cover the entire screen, it's not necessarily an issue. It doesn't have a lot of front load damage. It's backloaded. And because of that backloaded damage, that means it's just going to take a little bit longer to actually deal the damage that's required to kill the enemies, and it's going to take a little bit of time to set up. And so because of this setup time, and because of the thin point of vulnerability it has when it's out of Blood Mist, this is why we're kind of putting it where it's at. And that's our opinions. Infamous definitely could be number 1, but I think, you know, Sir K and I definitely think that there's another build out there that is going to overtake this one, just with the changes that are happening with how specific interactions are happening with the game. All right, so let's get into the big kahunas, the number 1 build. That is going to be Blood Surge. Overpower Blood Surge is what, in our opinion, is going to be the number 1 build in the game. The overpowered damage changes that they're making were really nice, which makes Overpower just hit a lot harder, and that's very nice. But there was a very large mechanical flaw with Blood Surge and its its damage application, being that the way that it worked is that you have an aspect with Blood Surge that basically causes Blood Surge to attack another time. So you have your Drain, you have a Nova, and then there's an aspect that gives you another Nova. Now what happened is that if you triggered Overpower on the Drain, it dealt damage. If you dealt damage on the primary Nova, then what would happen is that the Overpower damage would be split in half between the primary Nova and the secondary Nova. And if you dealt Overpower damage on the secondary Nova, then what would happen is that overpower damage would be cut in half. And then there was another issue where with Rathma's Vigor, which is the ultimate keystone that you can have with the Blood Necromancer, and with the Blood Surge. But Blood Surge, every single time you hit with a Nova 5 times, you get a guaranteed overpower. And with Rathma's Vigor, you could get a guaranteed overpower every 12 seconds. And now what's happening is it's actually going to get reduced every single time you pick up a Blood Orb and you heal yourself to a specific amount. And so because of that, you could basically have this guaranteed overpower and this guaranteed overpower line up to be on the same cast. And so the combination of, if you overpowered on your second Nova and it only dealt 50% overpower damage, and then if you dealt overpower on your primary Nova, but then the secondary Nova was going to deal the other 50% of the overpower, but the secondary Nova could do overpower as well, but it's not going to deal that overpower damage because the 50% took over, in combination with how the guaranteed overpowers would then overlap, and you had 2 guaranteed overpowers, but you would consume both of them on the same overpower cast, meant that the way that Blood Surge damage application was severely cut. And so that was the main problems with Blood Surge. But this is what they're doing. They're making it so that if you do have a guaranteed overpower, and they both line up at the same time, only one of them is going to be consumed, and then the next one will be consumed on the next cast. So that means that if your Rathma's Vigor and the Blood Surge guaranteed overpowers line up, it will consume one, and then on the next cast, it will consume the other. And so that means that you're no longer losing that guaranteed overpower. The other thing that they're doing is that they're making it so that if the secondary Nova was to overpower, so they would only deal 50% damage, they're actually just going to take that overpower and just apply it on the next cast of Blood Surge. That's nuts. So like the Nova was going to overpower, but it was on the secondary Nova, so it's only 50% of your overpower damage. They're now just going to be like, nah, actually what we're going to do is we're just going to make it so that the next overpower, the next cast of your Blood Surge legitimately deals that overpower, which then could stack with a guaranteed, but you've already had that overpower, so that guaranteed is going to hold, and the next cast it'll be an overpower, the next cast will be an overpower, and the next cast you could like have the chance to overpower, but then you could actually, and you see how this is happening? Like all of the overpowers are stacking on each other, and you're just going to overpower. And the thing about Blood Surge is that it's a whole screen deleter. The whole thing just takes the whole screen and then just deletes the whole screen. And the damage is front loaded. It is right now, it deals damage right in your face. And the cool thing about Blood Surge is that it can utilize lidless wall, which means that it can utilize the Omni Storm idea, and it can continually keep up the crit hit chance, which then means that it can dip into the crit multipliers much better than the Blood Lance. And with all the other overpower multipliers that are happening, and with Blood Surge utilizing the Bone Storm, this is why we think that Blood Surge is going to take the cake. It is just going to absolutely run everything over. It has a very lazy play style. You literally just run in, you hold a button, the whole screen dies. You're going to be moving so fast because when you evade, you become unstoppable, and you have the unstoppable vampiric power. You have the, when you evade, that's the vampiric power, and then you have the aspect in your boots that when you're unstoppable, you gain movement speed. So you're just going to be flying through the dungeon super fast. When you overpower, you're going to have insane attack speed. You're going to be double casting on your Blood Surge because of that aspect being it is. You're going to be having like 200% attack speed, but every single core cast is casting 2 of them, and the 2 of them that are casting is going to guarantee the overpowers in the way that they are. Like everything is stacking in such levels of synergy that Blood Surge is just going to completely take the cake and just run the game. So this is why we believe that Blood Surge is going to be S+ tier. So I hope I was able to go into detail everything. I know this is kind of a longer video. Next video that we're going to talk about is going to actually be the item power changes, which I believe is literally the best change in the entire game. Like other than the class balance changes, when we're talking about quality of life changes, the item power drop changes that they made based on monster power level was legitimately the best change they made, and that's the next video we're going to talk about. So I'll see you in that one. I'll upload that one later today. Other than that, have yourselves a wonderful day. OperatorOtter out.